Good afternoon, everyone. This is yet another Wednesday at lunch with the Gilder Lehrman Center, or GLC at lunch. I'm David Blight, director of the center. We're going to hear a talk today from one of our 1-month fellows whose time here, I think, is unbelievably about to end. That's the way it always feels with 1-month people. Just when you know where the doors are to the libraries, your time runs out. Stephanie Saxton is our current fellow. She's a PhD and her other degrees from Johns Hopkins University in political science. Also, I think a BA in English. She's now teaching at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. She's worked on lots of projects about urban affairs, about power in cities, and in her case, particularly Baltimore. She's teaching courses in law and punishment and constitutional history or constitutional law at Dickinson College, which is a great liberal arts college down there in southern Pennsylvania. I have other friends who teach there. Her talk, which is her dissertation and soon to be a book, I'm sure, Gold, Coal, and Oysters, Politics of the Origins of Police or Policing. Stephanie, without further ado, welcome again to the GLC. Hope your research here has been useful, and we can't wait to hear about this. You brought in the oyster fans here of New Haven.
Great. Thank you so much, all. Thanks for coming in on this snowy and icy day, number like 30 of snowy and icy days. And thank you everybody online for coming to this. I really do appreciate it.
Good crowd. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, welcome. I will give 2 warnings. One, this is a work in progress, and that means I really do ask of you to share any thoughts on the argument I'm making, the cogence of the links between some of the arguments, and the project. It's in its early form. This is me transitioning some papers and my dissertation into a book project. And the second warning I will give is that I'm a political scientist by training.
So all right, quite all right.
Okay. There is a
historians like political science.
Thank you. Right. I appreciate that. There is
a political science department.
We are. I love that. There's a historian of slavery I will let go unnamed who one time heard a presentation by a political scientist like myself who works in American political development. And they said, this might be the past, but it is not history.
Oh dear.
So okay. If I do that today, I own that.
No worries.
Okay. Gold, Coal, and Oysters, the development of American police. I begin in 1850. There were 5 police departments in the United States. By 1899, there were over 1,000 police departments. In 50 years, the United States built a vast network. This is from an original data set of the year every police department was created. I have 23 states, and this is what it looks like thus far. Part of this book project asks, how did the United States create a vast network of police, particularly in 50 years? It's somewhat of a short amount of time to do such a level of state development. In order to answer this question, I have traced the formation, debate, and passage of police bills at the local and state level. I've also traced the pace of police adoption across the United States in a data set of the 23 states, which is what you just saw an image of. I've analyzed the conditions around police proposals and adoption at this municipal or state level. The materials making up this project are letters to and between political elites, newspaper articles, city council proceedings, and to get a picture of—
Sounds like history to me.
Thank you, David. If I'm ever criticized by another historian, I'll say I have David Blythe's stamp of approval. And congressional proceedings to look at the national level debates around this question. Today, I'll focus specifically on Maryland, where I've done a bulk of the research in the specific development of police proposal, debate, and adoption of bills. And I think Maryland's an important place to study this for a couple of reasons. I think it is a representative state for the mid-19th century in as much as its flow of immigrants and immigration, in as much as it had a number of different political economic industries like mining, fishing, railway expansion, in growing factories, and it was a slave state. It was dependent on enslavement. So for these reasons, I think Maryland is really important. And its proximity to DC meant things that were happening in Maryland or Baltimore often showed up in the congressional record in ways that you don't get around small municipalities and other parts of the United States. Okay, so in looking at these materials, I've come to see that questions about policing often became bigger debates in the United States and along the lineage of asking, who can enforce law? So to answer this, I make three main claims throughout this manuscript. The first is that competing visions of white supremacy had correspondingly competing visions of law enforcement. The second is that many who supported police did so not because of a specific task it would perform. They didn't make a functionalist argument, I see in the record. They didn't say they could do this, but rather because having police would signify something. Either signify to elites who their allies are, signify to investors that the area is worth pouring capital into, or signify to the world that that city was a metropole of empire. And the third main claim I try and make through this is that police, the preferred law enforcement institution of the war victors, ballooned post-Civil War, suturing the deep conflict. So here's the tentative book plan. Again, quite early on, but tentative book plan. The first part, I hope to begin in the early American Republic, looking at writing of the framers, which I've looked at initially at this point, threading through the origins of policing to military history. Police departments were not an institutional innovation that was familiar to nation states at the time, and rather, I would like to suggest that there were visions of law enforcement that persisted across the 1820s, 30s, and 40s into police debates. So that chapter tries to thread police history into military history in that way. And it relies on a lot of secondary literature. There's a lot of wonderful work by historians on how the framers were imagining law enforcement, restricting federal law enforcement. So I will mostly not talk about that part because it's not where the original research comes in. Sure. The next part is what I will speak to today, the future of slavery and law enforcement. That's where this the first claim I mentioned comes in, about competing white supremacies and their corresponding visions of law enforcement. And then I'll move through the early police legislation. How exactly did a police bill move from proposal to debate to passage, looking at Baltimore? And finally, Reconstruction and suturing divisions with a police boom. Post-Civil War, there was a massive increase in the number of police departments. They were passed at exponential rates compared to other points in time. And I will look at the Oyster Police as an example of this, as a place that post-Civil War moved from posse comitatus as their law enforcement to a police department. So in the first part, I'll make this really brief. This is an image of the Boston Massacre. And there is a wonderful historian who has written about the Boston Massacre as a moment of this conflict between local unprofessionalized law enforcement and an occupying militarized force. So Dr. Nicole Brolt writes on the occupation of Boston, when British sent troops into Boston, two policing forces, one a municipal entity representing local order, and the other a military force representing imperial governance, found themselves at odds. Leading up, she argues that the Boston Massacre was actually a conflict between their night watch, which was considered an unprofessionalized local civil law enforcing institution, and the British Army, which was more militarized presence. So this was a conflict of policings, she explains. I think this conflict, those two images of policing, carry into what I will claim are the visions of police in the 1840s and 50s. These two threads of policing, the night watch and militia, persisted until the development of municipal police departments. and the threads transfigured into competing law enforcement visions of competing white supremacies. What do I mean by that? So I will try and demonstrate for you what this argument is. Competing visions of white supremacy have correspondingly competing visions of law enforcement. On the one side, there are Democrats and planters wanting to secure the future of enslavement, favoring posse comitatus and the existing night watch. They favored unprofessionalized local law enforcement. On the other hand, Republicans and burgeoning nativist parties like the Know Nothings proposed immigration limits, continental colonialism, but opposed a future that included slavery in the United States. These political actors favored a professionalized police force. I look to the debate over the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 as a moment when this idea of policing was really exemplified. So in the debate over the Fugitive Slave Act, Southern congressmen wanted Northern territories to enforce the fugitive slave law. They wanted those areas to follow a national law. And the question came to be, how would the fugitive slave law be enforced? Would it be through a standing army? Would it be through federalizing national government workers, like the Postal Service, to carry out the Fugitive Slave Act? And they ended on a vision of posse comitatus, whereby any local law enforcement, like constable or sheriff, could gather a group of white men to carry out the law. That people were deputized by a government official saying, you must enforce this law. So a congressman from the South describes this law enforcement institution, saying, I doubt not that men there will understand that though they may entertain an opinion that a law is wrong, yet as citizens, they have no right, when called to enforce it, to act upon their individual judgment of its merits. So here the congressman from the South says that the Fugitive Slave Act must be enforced by white men in the South who are so called to enforce a law, and though they might be against the law, it is their duty as a citizen to enforce it. It was a dispersed, decentralized kind of deputization. Another congressman talks about the Fugitive Slave Act by saying, in our country, we have the most striking and brilliant illustrations of the benefits of slavery. In the vast areas redeemed from the wilderness, where malaria forbade the immigration of whites, and which now teem with the production of Southern staples. In the large amount of valuable exports, the production of slave labor, which fright the keels of commerce to every harbor of the world. In our political stability, where no armed police is necessary for the suppression of mobs, and the mace of civil magistrate is omnipotent. So in this debate, this congressman from the South deems slavery incompatible with a professionalized police force, saying that this country is actually built on a self-government model, on a decentralized law enforcement model, whereby people are called to enforce laws as part of their citizenship, rather than outsourcing it to a state official. These threads carried through the decade into the start of the Civil War. I know I'm jumping in time, historians, I'm so sorry. This is 9 years later. But I bring this up just to show the ideological opposition to police forces were consistent across this decade by Democrats. At the start of the Civil War, another Democrat congressman, in talking about the Baltimore Police Department, said, to the formation of the Baltimore Police, I was originally opposed. I forgot to put his name up here. That's a congressman from Maryland. Another congressman said, I had thought that this was a government resting for its support upon the affections and consent of the governed, that it did not require even 14 or 15,000 men as police to keep the people of this country in order. So tracing the Democrats' opposition to police across time at the national level here, I'm trying to show that Democrats felt that to have a society dependent on enslavement meant to have a decentralized, unprofessionalized model of policing. And here's the pace of police growth over time. So when I showed you the map earlier of police departments being adopted across the United States, this is their rate of adoption. So by 1850, we have very few, right? We had 5 compared to the police growth that would happen. Entering the Civil War, we have, I think the number is 40 something, sorry. I don't have the exact number in my head. But we can see that post-Civil War is where it really skyrockets. I'm sorry to everybody online, I just stood up in front of you.
It's hard to manage.
So we just looked over the course of time from 1850 to 1860, the kind of debates that were happening as this growth was really slow. What does that look like at the local level, right? The local opposition. In Kentucky, this is a quote from a congressman, I'm almost positive, in the Courier Journal says, "A police bill takes from the citizens of Louisville certain privileges that no one worthy of the boon of self-government ought to surrender." That is to say, they thought it a right of citizenship to be able to enforce law, right? To not outsource that to a state official. And in Baltimore, when the Democrat mayor vetoed the police bill, he said, "My objections to the police bill are so numerous and serious, I will not attempt to particularize." So that section just tried to go over how I see the competing visions of white supremacy here as correspondingly competing visions of law enforcement. Because this isn't to say that the Republicans who are anti-slavery were offering a really wonderful view of the world. They were advocating things like a continental empire, right? And we will see that these were nativist parties who were endorsing police departments. It's just to say that these competing white supremacies had competing law enforcement ideas. Okay, moving into a particular story of police growth here. Police in the United States are an interesting institution to study because they're hyper-local, right? And in looking at how any given police bill is passed, local idiosyncrasies are always come into play, right? So telling a clean story about police is always quite difficult, I've found, as much as we might want to do that and declare a single origin story. However, one pattern has emerged where police bills were introduced when economic elites were in conflict. And I'll talk about two other factors that I see in some of the debates. But what does that look like? In Baltimore City, there's inter-elite division in the 1850s, mapping onto what I was talking about before. Democrats fighting for the future of enslavement were radically opposed to the burgeoning Know Nothing Party, who was gaining a white membership without commitment to enslavement. This was quite common across a couple of states at the time. Know Nothing Party, a nativist party, was taking the vacuum left by the Whigs, who was losing support. And here I just have some of the actors, some of the leaders of these competing visions. Democrat Mayor Hollins, who was mayor of 1852, and Thomas Swan, who was the leader of the burgeoning nativist party, an anti-immigrant party called the Know Nothings. Before entering politics, he was the president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And when the railroad was finished, actually, the Baltimore Sun declared Napoleon conquered the Alps and Swan the Alleghenies. I think it's a really...
B&O is the biggest railroad in the country.
Yes, yes. Baltimore was the second most populous city at the time, if that helps shape some of the conditions here too. So these two parties had corresponding party gangs committed to their ideological positions. So middle and upper class men formed these party gangs. They fought violently. These were co-signed by the politicians themselves. There are letters in Thomas Swan's in the Baltimore City archives from like wink gang affiliates writing under pseudonyms to him saying, "Thank you for your help in this way," blah, blah, blah. A lot of violence was co-signed by politicians and endorsed. So there were two other kinds of, there's another set of rhetoric happening. On the one hand, the positioning of Baltimore as a center of empire with, as, like I said, the second most populous city. So in 1853, the Sun declared in support of the police department, law and order, order and law, these are the two cornerstones of empires. A lawyer gave a lecture at the Maryland Institute that was reprinted for days in both the Baltimore News American and the Sun, in which he said, "The condition of things here may be more satisfactorily illustrated by a comparison with the capital abroad in which the laws are properly enforced. I refer to the city of London. not only because it was well known to us all Americans, but because it's the best instance to be found anywhere of what can be accomplished by an efficient system of police. Throughout the historical record, there are moments at this point in time when people are linking Baltimore to London, thinking these are comparable cities. And in doing so, declaring London as the metropole of British Empire and Baltimore the metropole of American Empire.
Wow. Huge seaport. I mean, really.
Yeah.
Other than New York, the biggest.
The biggest. Baltimore, another set of rhetoric that was happening around the debate of policing was trying to render Baltimore a good place for investment. The Southern Commerce Convention was held in Baltimore in 1852, wherein the keynote said, Baltimore, now that she has finished her great thoroughfare to the west, invites the business community's cordial cooperation. But she must give assurances there will be no backward movement in the enterprise. The South is greatly interested in this question. It goes on to say that Baltimore needs some of the staples of a good place of investment. No lawlessness, fertile ground for commerce, friendliness to business, things like that.
Returning fugitive slaves.
Returning fugitive slaves. But the Fugitive Slave Act already was established law in Maryland because it was a slave state. But yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. The Baltimore News American wrote that lawlessness inflicting not only on the fair fame, but also on the prosperity of our city. There's a real concern that the economic growth happening at the time would be thwarted by a sense of the partisan gangs, especially. Okay, so I just threw a couple of different things at us. There's the intra-elite conflict between Democrats and know-nothings. There's rhetoric around the Center for Empire, and there's rhetoric around Baltimore needing to be a good place to invest. Let me throw that in a timeline to make it all clear. Doing as Paul Pearson says, defines process tracing, emphasizing time and sequence of events, right? So.
Historians are old-fashioned, they just call them timelines.
That's fair. That's fair. We always need methodological justifications in political science. So in November of 1852, there's an instance of partisan gang violence on Thanksgiving that made it to the New York Times. Baltimore was pretty embarrassed by it. In December of 1852, the Southern Commerce Convention met in Baltimore, and that's when the keynote talked about Baltimore needing to stay fertile ground for business investment for Southerners and the West. In January of 1853, the B&O Railroad was completed at the helm of Thomas Swan, who had become a know-nothing mayor, right? This was a big deal. It made a number of shareholders in the B&O stock incredibly wealthy. It brought commerce to the city in unprecedented ways, and it helped, in some ways, the transition from Baltimore town to Baltimore city. It was also businessmen at the thought at the time, Baltimore was in a geographically perfect condition for rail. It connected north and south and east and west, and it was a port city. They thought that they would overthrow New York, Savannah, New Orleans in the arrival of this railroad. In March of 1853, the Maryland General Assembly proposes a Baltimore Police Department. It had to be approved at the state level, and these are the conditions leading up to Maryland General Assembly considering a police bill. They pass it, but then it's up to the city council to take up the legislation. In July of that year, debate over the Baltimore Police Department happens in the city council. Democrats in the city council are opposed, and know-nothings would like the police department. They end up passing it by a slim margin, but then the Democrat mayor vetoes it in that month. In November of 1854, the partisan gangs lead an election riot again. That's pretty consistent. That happens in a number of other cities as well. It happens in Kentucky and Kansas at this time. I'm pretty sure New York and Philadelphia as well. 2 years after this, the night watch continues as its form of police, as well as other kinds of law enforcement. So there's private police for hire, there's private security for hire, there's the sheriff, there's vigilante groups and the posse comitatus that's possible under the sheriff, and basically any government official can call in a posse comitatus. until November of 1856, another election day of violence elects Thomas Swan. And after months of public pressure, the city council passes the police bill under the nativist majority, the know-nothing majority. So it's not until 1857 that Baltimore gets a police after attempts over the last over 4 years prior. One of the things I'd like to suggest from this is that an important form of police development arises from the need to settle intra-elite conflicts. Existing literature on police presumes a unified elite class which was organized sufficiently to make political demands. But the cases I study show otherwise, at least in the 19th century, were not always unified and harbored competing visions of repression and policing. And as in the case of these partisan gangs, it was becoming a liability for cities to have elites with their own for hire security apparatuses fighting with one another. So I hope I just successfully moved through the second claim that I'm trying to make. That many supporters of police creation endorse the new law enforcement institution, not because of a specific task it would perform, but because it would signify something. It would signify to elites who their allies are that they might not need to hire, that they might not need to facilitate vigilante or for hire security apparatuses anymore. That they might signify to investors that the area is worth pouring capital into, as Baltimore was trying to do at with the onset of the railroad. And signify to the world the city was a metropolitan empire. They really thought they would be the London of the United States. And they thought because of that, like London, they needed a metropolitan police department. So, post-Civil War, I really don't mean to skip over the Civil War. I don't think that's something that we should do. But in time constraints, as much as
many as 40 police departments were formed during the war. I think that's what you said.
Up through the war, and they were being passed during the war too.
Well, that's interesting. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. There's something to be said about the
What they're
passage.
doing,
Yeah.
dissent, there were problems. Go ahead.
Mm. Post-war, police, the preferred law enforcement institution of the war victors, ballooned, suturing intra-elite conflict. So the case I'd like to use to demonstrate this is the Oyster Police. On the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, it's known for, so many things. It's oyster industry, fishing, and also as a water body in a slave state that was really important for anti-slavery movements, in as much as enslaved people use the Chesapeake Bay for escape often. Marylanders were, the planter class in Maryland was well aware of this, and they attempted to create a police force of the Chesapeake Bay multiple times. The first attempt was in 1847, quote, to board and examine all vessels and take therefrom and detain for trial all persons navigating said bay who may be reasonably suspected of designing to aid or found having on board fugitive slaves attempting to escape. This bill did not pass. Instead of passing each of these iterations of a police force to be on the water, the Maryland General Assembly, the planter class defected to posse comitatus, the decentralized form of deputizing white men on the water. We can see this in this article right here, where in the Maryland law, it says all owners and masters of canoes, boats, or vessels licensed under this article, being white men, are hereby constituted officers of this state for the purpose of arresting and taking before any judge of any circuit court or justice of the peace who have jurisdiction therein, any person or persons who may be engaged in violating any of the provisions of this article and of seizing a canoe, boat, or vessel engaged therein. Those white men are vested with the power to summon the posse comitatus to aid in making such arrest and seizure. So here I'd like to show that despite the proposition for police bills on the Chesapeake Bay, they rejected it in lieu of the continued posse comitatus and the continued deputization of white men citizens. Until post-Civil War. Thomas Swan, back again. He switched from the Know Nothing Party to the Democrats because he has no true political allegiance. He was just kind of a figure obsessed with gaining power. His archives are very funny. He wrote long letters to newspapers in Maryland, telling them that they write lies about him. He accused everybody of libel.
Interesting.
You sued everybody. Or you threatened to sue everybody.
He threatened to sue everybody. This was just long letters telling these newspapers they were bad and wrong. So he goes from mayor of Baltimore to governor of Maryland. He was a regressive governor post-Civil War, trying to claw back some of the civil rights gains over the 1860s. And he presides over the passage of the state oyster police force, which you can see pictured here. Created a professionalized law enforcement body on the Chesapeake Bay. Now, this isn't to say that something exactly improved in the ideological position, but rather post-Civil War, these Democrats were more open to the idea of a police force, right? Also, either that or the victors of the Civil War, Republicans and know-nothings, presided over and created them. But like I said, it's not to say that these police forces operated in a particularly better way than maybe a vigilante would have. The first commander of the Oyster Police Force was a Confederate Naval War veteran. Instead, creating police forces became a way that they could put political allies in charge, which in some ways was the ideal of the posse comitatus all along, right? That my political ally should be able to police, not yours.
Half of Maryland was Confederate, I think.
So I've just tried to walk through what is a somewhat long and idiosyncratic history, but we've now moved to the post-war period where police growth balloons. So implications for this. I think some of the upshots of this work are that today the United States has both high levels of vigilante or extra legal violence and vast networks of police departments because this was such a protected way of enforcing law for so long. And I don't think those threads have gone away. I hope that this history also showed that police departments were contested and not predetermined, right? And when we look at policy outcomes, sometimes we let the losing policy outcome fall out, but I think it's really important we understand the debates that happen in those positions. And finally, police departments rose amid debates about who can enforce law, something that we are still debating over. Thank you so much, everybody. And I thought of everywhere.
So many contemporary resonances, but we won't go there first.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. And oyster police, my God. Did you know about this? Yeah, you know about that, of course. We have some Marylanders here today who don't know these things. Questions in the I want to ask, if I may, was there anything, well, you've explained Swan now, who was what an equal opportunity businessman and investor who, by joining the Democrats, tells us a lot about his racial politics.
Yeah.
But what drew the know-nothing ideology to this idea of police forces that would be public? Was it their concern over immigrants? Immigrant crime or you know, to law and order? That's curious because there's been a lot written about the know-nothings, but it's usually just trying to explain their nativism and how most of them eventually joined the Republicans, but Swan doesn't. Railroad entrepreneur. I don't know, you learn much about that. What drew the know-nothings to this idea of public policing or semi-public policing?
It's a really good question. One, I think that the know-nothings, the solution know-nothings had for immigrants was don't let them in the country. There wasn't a sense of policing them. There wasn't a sense of, and I think
they wanted anti-immigration laws.
Yeah, they wanted limits. They wanted closed borders. Don't let them in at all. It seems to me that the support for policing came in wanting to preside over the use of legitimate violence in a state. That in some ways that having a police department would settle some conflicts about, like I said, the competing security apparatuses that would transform the conflicts they had with each other from the street brawl realm
Gangs, yeah,
to the electoral realm.
right,
Um,
okay.
that would just displace a conflict over who
Law
could
and order,
have
man, you
violence.
gotta give up your own gang.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, wow.
but it seems to me that they were open to, the eventual end of their gangs,
Yeah,
if it meant
yeah.
they could have their, like electoral head presiding over a police department.
Yeah, Michelle.
Such a great project and such a great talk. Thank you so much. I guess the question I have that I think would be relevant for our audience, the GLC audience, is, I think in the study of slavery and its legacies, it's often widely believed or assumed that the police forces are kind of a direct outgrowth of slave patrols. And your work is, so challenging to that idea. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. And also, I think there's a little bit of confusion about, this is a separate question, about what the oyster police are. So if you could just explain that a little bit for people who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, they're not oysters with like guns.
And it's not a euphemism for the police, it's specifically
Yeah,
protecting the
but-
oyster industry, but.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, that's fair, oyster police is where I agree, sorry, I should include.
Chesapeake folk know these things,
Right.
the rest of us.
Yeah, you are correct to say that what I'm trying to do is intervene in the debate on what is the relationship between enslavement and policing. In as much as it seems to me like in municipalities, it was the abolition of the night watch that led into police. That's where I see the institutional lineage itself. Now, that's to me a different argument and like an institutional historical way of tracing. There's another argument, right, which is what logics are at play here. I think when we talk about the resonances between police or slave patrols or slave catching, there's something to that we should identify and ask what the trends are. I'd like to say that there are important distinctions, and it's not a distinction, and it's a distinction because the people at the time, the Democrats and planters at the time, felt it important distinction. So I think that's worth intervening in the debate on and saying that, from what I've seen, the planters really did not want police. They didn't want to outsource the total domination. And in some ways it makes sense.
They want to be police themselves.
Yeah, they don't want to be police themselves because that was in as much as there was so much of the desire of total human domination that is impossible in a way. It's an impossibility to do total human dominion. They did not want to outsource the total control to something that might appear bureaucratized, because bureaucratized was not total discretionary control, which is actually what they desired.
Yeah, well, isn't it also rooted in this idea that of course, the South is not just big plantations by any means, but a plantation or even a small farm with small numbers of enslaved people. Enforcement of any kind of discipline is private. It's by definition private. Whereas cities force this out into a public realm in some way. I don't know how you would. I mean, what I love about your analysis here is this notion that, well, the origins of policing is a crooked path. It isn't just rooted in slave patrols. It isn't just rooted in this or just rooted in that. It's a complicated, messy, violent, political process. That's actually good history, by the way.
It makes for bad generalizability.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I sort of cluster. But to that point, I think one of the things that really spoke to me about the project, as you described it, was that it's not a difference between is one version of policing white supremacists and the other one not, or is it, or can it not? It's just like they're both obviously advocating for a white supremacist version of policing. There's sort of, it's a question of how, not if. And so, I do think that's all feels shockingly, or not shockingly, but disturbingly prescient and
Yeah.
present. Like even the Boston Massacre image, I was like, oh man, this sucks. But and which is mostly to say that like I think the project is really interesting and grounded in all sorts of like complicated things that are meaningful and relevant to me personally as a historian. I can't speak for all historians, but I do feel like the disciplinary interchange is like going great. But my question was sort of to build on this question, you know, it's not entirely shocking to me that like planters and white elites in the US South before the Civil War wouldn't be particularly interested in a professionalized police force, because like, what do they need it for, right? It's kind of happened. Like this method is already, the disciplining, particularly of African Americans, is already happening. But I am curious what their approach to disciplining and policing of sort of, you know, low-class whites looks like in this time period. And then does that help us understand this like shift after the war? Because, you know, now all of a sudden the systems of discipline and control and violence that exist during slavery, you know, now there are millions of formerly enslaved free African Americans in the South and in the North, and I see why there might be a shift in their approach there, but then I don't really see why there would be such a big shift in the North, right? Is it for fear of Southern formerly enslaved people coming north? I mean, like, so I think there's like this interesting sort of pre and post North and South kind of simultaneous thing. And then the other just like brief thing that it's not so much a question, but something that might be interesting. I work a little bit on urban environmental reform in this time period, and there's like such a stress on discipline and order. And I wonder if there might be some, but it is a very much an elite movement, and it's very much in my mind sort of elites kind of exercising their own anxieties about their lack of control over the city through environmental reform, and in particular work on the construction of Central Park. And some people make these same allusions to London, and other people just say it will attract capital to the city. Like this, a lot of the same arguments. So I wonder if that might be an interesting parallel for you to explore, like if books I can recommend later or whatever, or maybe you have already done it better.
That's really interesting. I mean, working backwards, the oyster police was in some ways a response to the oyster boom that was happening in the Chesapeake Bay in the 1850s and 60s. And, you know, we see that there are two police bills proposed and rejected in 1852 and 3, right? So they toyed with the idea of having police be a regulatory agency in response to this boom, because the boom meant a lot more boats on the water. It meant a lot more people. And there was a really early fear of overfishing. In the 1850s and 60s, there was a fear of overfishing in the Chesapeake Bay. So the oyster laws were passed in order to, you know, declare size limits, declare amount that a boat could catch per day, things like that.
So they're almost doing resource management.
Yeah, so it was all, yeah, it was like an attempt at environmental regulation, but the vision for it was a police department. And it was intertwined with the fear that persisted across the previous decades of Black men on the water, making a living.
Right.
Because at that point, post-Civil War, Maryland, in some ways, in that around the Chesapeake Bay, shifted from a agricultural economy dependent on tobacco to a fishing industry. And all of a sudden, a bunch of formerly enslaved people could make a living fishing. And the people who were previously opposed to the freedom of water in escaping enslavement were now opposed to the freedom of water when it came to the ability to earn a living wage.
Can I say?
Marylander, sound off.
I mean, I think it's, first of all, I mean, prior to the Civil War,
Started storing the fisheries. Right?
free Black and enslaved people are harvesting oysters and are making money and are
Yeah.
using that industry as a mechanism to both kind of learn pathways to the north and cross the get information for crossing the Mason-Dixon line and traveling more north, and as well actually making escapes and facilitating other people's escapes. So part of the impulse to, I think a main part of the impulse to control the industry, to regulate the industry, even the so-called environmental regulations, is really about controlling movement, and it's about controlling labor, and it's also about controlling sort of property, like marine property, and the ability to kind of concentrate capital in ownership. You know, you don't want it to be willy-nilly and everybody being able to profit, especially not enslaved and free Black people. So I'm highly skeptical about the kind of environmental and conservation motivations for even, you know, the size limits and things like that. I think it's more about kind of concentrating wealth.
Yeah,
And just to be clear, so oyster police, it's not a euphemism. We had a question about this. It's not a euphemism for the police force writ large. It's specifically pertaining to policing, regulating the oyster industry, which is, you know, big business, both before the war and then increasingly after the war, associated with the railroads and kind of the development of canning industries and things like that, where, you know, the markets are just increasing astronomically.
yeah. A statistic I often think about, just to give an idea of the scale here, is at this time, 30% of the oysters consumed in the entire world were from 2 places of the Chesapeake Bay.
Whoa.
That's all the way from London to China is where they found, you know, canned oysters from the Chesapeake Bay.
And
And
New
that's-
Haven is very much involved in this history, but that's a topic for another time.
Yeah.
Along the harbor, is the oyster thing.
Yes, but then the oyster speculators from the Long Island Sound went down to the Chesapeake.
Okay, yeah.
But to your first question is really good. I'm still thinking about it. How to explain the pre and post North and South, particularly when it comes to what did it look like to manage like poor white people? And yeah, it's a great question. It seemed at the time to be night watch. Which,
For white people as well.
yeah,
But that incredible growth, I forget the number now, up to 800 or something police.
it was 1,016.
1,000 by what, 1900?
Yeah.
God, I mean, that means every city, every town, counties probably are creating police. I mean, this has to be part of, you know, the response to the growth of teeming cities, right? I mean, disease, conflict, ethnic conflict, migration. You know, and yet you've also got a militarized culture. I mean, from the war.
Yeah.
By the way, and on
Yeah.
that note,
Yeah.
you may never have had contact with her, but I have a PhD student just finished here named Kate Birkbeck. You
Oh,
connected
yes.
at all? You know about Kate? Maybe.
Was Kate at Hopkins for a second?
I think she may have been.
She did research there. Yeah,
I think we got a coffee one time.
I think you had a coffee, right? Well, she's worked on militias and guns.
Yeah.
And where all the guns went from the Civil War and how they went into militias and police. You two need to talk.
Incredible.
I'll put you in.
Yeah.
She's on a postdoc over at Brown,
Cool.
and she did a lot of research on this business of militias and the culture of militias and where all of it. You know, frankly, millions of guns that were produced for the Civil War, where'd they go? She's been tracing the guns.
That's incredible.
So it's a militarized culture too, so it's a lot of factors here. But you know, I mean, you can't solve all of these things, like what is policing in these new police departments? Uniform people, presumably.
Yeah.
Something in our news now, uniforms, not wearing masks, presumably. But what else did it mean? I meant firearms.
Yeah.
I mean, they were wearing firearms, they were law.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the transitions from night watch to police is a foot patrol, because night watch was often in watch boxes and, you know, stable in one place over the night, waiting for like a call to ring out.
Oh,
Whereas
okay.
police
yeah,
forces
I
then,
didn't know what that meant. Is it a guy with a little lamp going around? What?
sometimes, yeah. Yeah, the transition to police departments meant uniforms, issuing a gun, or sometimes they would use their own gun.
Mm.
And, being mobile, walking around,
Mhm.
patrolling.
So similarly, I'm curious about who are the I mean, I think the point you make about how both posse comitatus and sort of the early police forces are about putting political allies in charge. But in terms of like who are the, I mean, I don't know, like beat cop is the right word, but like the sort of low level and state violence enforcers.
Yeah.
Are a lot of them former soldiers who are just like, well, I know how to use this thing and they'll walk around town with it? I mean, I'm curious about who those folks are. I don't know if that's the focus of this project. I know it's like, there's a lot more sort of like intellectual and political history. But I'm curious if you know, if that feels like it's part of this
Does
project.
anybody
or if it's a
study
different
that?
project.
And who becomes police?
Yeah, I depend on the secondary literature for
Okay,
that.
sure, yeah.
Which,
Well-
you know, there's a decent amount on
Okay.
who it was, of number, and when not night watch police, one
Yeah.
police departments, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sam Matrani has looked at this in, his study of Chicago, Adam Alco's Men of Mobtown talks about it a bit,
Well, a lot of them, union veterans.
I don't know the, status of their veteran or not, or anything.
No, I don't either.
That's a really interesting point. I know in the Oyster Police, there were a lot of naval Confederate veterans.
And the way around boats.
Yeah, exactly. It was just super interesting to me. Because it seemed to me another kind of post-war figure was the veteran criminal, in as much as there is a crime
Cities
zone.
passed resolutions that
Yeah.
no, two or more veterans could gather in the same place, and it was illegal for them to have a gun,
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
because they were, oh, yeah, because
It's
they
like
would get
black
drunk.
codes for veterans. I mean,
Oh, no, cities passed all kinds, I have another student that did a whole dissertation on Jordan, it's amazing. Veterans were often, especially in the first years after the
Yeah.
war, were considered dangerous, and many were. They
yeah,
were so screwed up,
yeah.
they'd get drunk and shoot up streets,
Mm-hmm.
so. Another reason you need police, I guess. I
Yeah,
don't-
and there's another history to this, which is, like, there's a constant tension from even the time of the Constitution onward about this tension between, professional and unprofessional policing,
Oh, yeah.
whereby
Yeah.
people with capital or high-level bureaucrats were consistently dissatisfied with unprofessional violence workers because they thought they were fumbling fucking idiots. Like,
Mhm.
and this is in some way why the birth of the NRA happened, is because military bureaucrats were constantly dissatisfied by what it meant to have a civil military force, or what it meant to have,
A farm boy becomes your militia and your police,
yes,
good luck.
exactly. Politicians were constantly dissatisfied with the sharpsmanship,
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
drunkenness, the like total undisciplined nature of deputized white men.
yeah.
So this was.
Well, that's your slave patrols in the south too.
Yeah, exactly.
Jobs for
Yeah, I
guys.
mean, I'm just thinking about today.
Well,
Yes.
I know, we can't not think about it, can we?
We do have a few online.
Yeah.
Go
ones.
for it,
Let's
yeah.
get to those. So somebody asked, have you researched the development of a police force in Richmond, Virginia during the residency of the Confederate President Jefferson Davis?
Mm.
The Unionist Henry Box was arrested and imprisoned for his pro-union views. Who and how was he arrested, and by whom was he incarcerated?
Well, they wanna know about Richmond, that's not your. case.
I do, yeah, I don't know about Richmond. I do know that Richard Bensel has a wonderful book on the Confederate state.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
In as much as the inner workings of that bureaucracy and what it meant,
Richard
for
who?
Richard Bensel, Cornell political scientist, historian.
Mhm.
So I would look to him,
Huh.
and that's a fantastic question. I would love to learn more about.
Yeah, well,
And then-
Confederacy had food riots and all kinds of terrible domestic
Yeah,
violence.
Another question, very valuable talk, thank you. I'm working on a project considering the bounds of the state police and the state/police and the private with organizations like Nonprofit Police Foundation.
Mm.
What did funding practices look like in the early police legislation? And was it similar to current formal municipal budgeting, or were there other normalized flows of capital outside public money into departments and policing?
That's a wonderful question. It is entirely municipal budget based. So sometimes the opposition to police would be fiscal. But, you know, federal contributions to local police departments have increased over time, but still not enough to say that it's really federally funded. To this day, you know, federal money doesn't make up more than like 10% of a municipal budget. It really is a local institution paid for in local dollars. And it was true back then as well.
God, it'd be interesting to trace, when did presidential politics engage this? You know,
Yeah.
presidents over the years, I'm putting 100,000 new policemen on the streets, and you know, what is that? Drop in the bucket? I don't know. Probably in the late 19th century.
Yeah.
Other questions? Gosh, I don't know. I find this. All that talk about Baltimore, I mean, I've studied Baltimore a lot because of Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
It was the center of lots of things.
Yeah.
I see why you chose it. I mean, it was just a booming port. And ethnic. Oh my God, you know, it was the ethnic, it was a Chicago before Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not surprising this sort of begins there. Anyway. So-
Yeah, one of the things that the Oyster Police, immigrant rights societies, like the German Society of Baltimore, kept trying to get the Oyster Police to enforce labor laws, because a lot of the labor that eventually went into the oyster industry was kidnapped immigrants, literally unfree, kidnapped, forced to work on boats.
Really?
And the German Society, the Polish Society of Baltimore kept,
Illegal indentured servants.
yes,
What period are you
Whoa.
talking about?
that's the 1870s and 80s that
Okay.
happens. And
Very
they
interesting.
kept trying to get the Oyster Police Force to enforce labor laws, and they wouldn't.
Right.
They have priorities.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, then the fugitive slave thing here has to be a thread throughout this.
Yeah.
Especially for Maryland. Lots of escapes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Constant issue.
And specifically the oyster industry, I mean, it's just because of that kind of economic traffic, north and south. It's a perfect vehicle, literally, you know. And then, you know, a lot of the captains and the crew, if they're coming from the north, are sympathetic, you know. So they're not necessarily the ones that are really profiting from the industry, you know, they're kind of running the boats.
Can I ask you one last question?
Yeah.
In this work, whenever you chose to start studying policing, it's been, you know, major part of our political consciousness now for a long time, well before Trump. How does a political scientist sustain this, on the one hand, scholarly approach to your evidence and so forth and so on? And how much do you think about, I'm kind of writing for the present, or have you settled that in your own mind? Because historians have the same problem.
Yeah,
I don't think it's any different.
yeah, I don't hand out prescriptions for
You know,
the future, that's one thing. But
that's a good answer.
yeah, I mean, I started this project in graduate school in 2018, right? So between 2018 and now, a number of developments in like,
Sure.
one is always, I think political messaging and political analysis are separate things. And in as much as I respect the job of an organizer or somebody working in politics so deeply, that they have a skill set, a little bit, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, they have a skill set. Getting a political message out is one thing. Writing, I think, conducting research is different. We're given, the opportunity to get in deep and
Mhm.
far and nuanced in so many ways, and that is a
Sure.
privilege, and I don't think it translates especially well to political messaging. So I'm always wary of when the two might overlap. That isn't to say that principles don't guide it. Another thing is, some of these ideas came out of doing political work. So
Sure.
we were fighting the creation of a police department in Baltimore. It would have been a new police department,
Okay.
and somebody was so angry at this group and ended up, I think it was messaging us something that said, my property value is going to go up. I need this police department. And in some way that jump started a lot of the analysis that I have here of, oh, you don't even care about crime.
Right.
You care about like a speculative function of a police department that's so disconnected from what it might do on the ground.
This could be in your introduction to the book.
Yeah.
Well, and the police story in
What
Baltimore
motivated
has made and
discussion.
unmade mayors,
Yes.
as in other cities. God knows.
Yeah. But
Okay.
another thing that there were so many things I didn't fully appreciate until like years down the line. One, I tried not to talk about private police or private security. For a long time, I was like, keep this tight,
Sure.
only
Sure, you
bureaucratic
get into that, you're
departments.
into a whole different industry.
But then I couldn't write it without
Oh.
really giving attention to the real place of violence and the real place
Yeah,
of
yeah.
vigilante violence that was so part and parcel of the creation of these departments.
Yeah.
And
America was a violent place in the 19th century.
yeah,
And you didn't even get to the 61 riots in Baltimore.
Oh, yes.
Union troops came through, lots of people got killed.
yeah, another thing that I've just like not fully appreciated until now is there's a lot of work, especially in the 20th century, on police reform and police professionalization.
Yeah.
And I think I took for granted that the losers of police reform would go away. I don't think that's true, and I think actually the losers of a number of professionalization and reform battles stay there and shape the conditions continuing.
Oh.
Um,
Okay. Good.
those are my takeaways.
Wow, you got a hot topic. I love your answers. I don't hand out prescriptions. Oh, I think I can use that. I'm not gonna write you a prescription for your illness, but you can learn something. Anyway, any other questions, outside or in? Thank you all for coming out
Thank
in
you.
online land. It's been great to have you all here. Thank you, Stephanie. And